Good morning, boys and girls. I'm so glad to have a chance to be with you this morning. We've been talking about moms in the Bible. Now, they're not perfect moms by any means, but they are moms that mean very much to us as children of God. Now, the first mom that we talked about was the first mom, and that was Eve. The second mom was Sarah. The third mom was Rebecca, and the mom we're going to be talking about today, her name is Rachel, and she's going to become Jacob's wife. But let me back up a little bit here. We got to get to how that happened. So at the end of our lesson last week, Jacob was leaving the promised land where his father and mother were, and he was going to his uncle Laban's home because his brother Esau had threatened to kill him. Do you remember why Esau was so angry with Jacob? That's right. Jacob had tricked their father Isaac into giving him the family blessing. Now, Jacob had a lot to learn about how to be a member of God's family and how that person should live his life. But I have a feeling running away like this is going to teach him a whole lot. He probably felt very lonely and frightened on his first night away from home. He was probably on the cold, hard ground, and he probably really felt completely alone. But was he? Who was watching over him? That's right, God was protecting him. And this is a picture of what it might have looked like for him to be on the cold, hard ground and maybe even used a rock as his pillow. That night, God appeared to Jacob in a dream, and he saw a stairway reaching all the way from heaven down to where he was. Angels were going up and down the stairway, and at the top, God was standing. And God said to Jacob, "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants," and remember that's all his children's children. That's what descendants are. "I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying." God also told Jacob that he would have more children and children and children than anyone could count, and that all the nations on the earth would be blessed through them. Now, to whom did God make that promise the first time? Oh, if you were listening, you remember that promise the first time went to Abraham. All right, so God continues talking to Jacob, and he says, "I am with you, and I will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land." God promised this to all his children, then and now. He will never leave us. Now, when Jacob woke up from his dream, he realized that God really had spoken to him. How do you think he felt? Maybe he was afraid. Maybe he realized that he had disobeyed God and he was sad. Maybe he was encouraged by the fact that God told him he would be with him. Well, the Bible doesn't really tell us how he felt, but maybe he was a little bit afraid because he had sinned against his father and his brother, and suddenly he realized that God knew all about it. Have you ever been afraid when you realized that mom, dad, maybe your teachers knew about something that you had done that was wrong? Maybe that's kind of how Jacob felt. It was like, oh, I didn't think anybody knew about it. Now all of a sudden, not only does mom know about it, dad and my brother know about it, but God knows about it. Even if our parents and teachers don't know, God always knows. And God knows everything about us today, just as he knew everything about Jacob many, many, many years ago. Now, Jacob continued on his journey. And if you'll remember, Abraham lived over here in Ur. And God called him to leave his family, and he went up here to Haran, and then he moved on down to the Canaan area, which was the promised land. So now Jacob's going backwards. He's going this way and all the way back over to his uncle Laban's house at Ur. Now, when he reached his uncle's home, he helped Uncle Laban take care of his sheep. Laban asked him how much he wanted to be paid. Well, by that time, Jacob had fallen in love with a beautiful girl, Laban's younger daughter, and her name was, you guessed it, Rachel. So he said to Laban, I will work for 7 years if you will give me Rachel as my wife. Laban agreed, and 7 years later, they had a great wedding celebration. Now, there were 2 sisters in this family, Rachel, the younger, and Leah, the older. And back then, the tradition had it that the older sister should be married before the younger sister. So here's where some trickery is going to take place in our story. Now, back in those days, most of the time when the bride came in, she had a very thick veil over her face because that showed her purity before she was to get married. So the 7 years had passed, and there was a wedding. Now, it was a lavish wedding, a rich wedding, because Laban was a man of means. He had a lot of money. And that custom with the bride's face being covered is where the trickery comes in. Laban put Leah, the older sister, in the wedding gown with the veil and sent her down the aisle to marry Jacob. So his own uncle Laban played a very cruel trick on Jacob. So when Jacob lifts the veil back, imagine how surprised he was when he found out that it wasn't Rachel that he had married, but it was Leah. Jacob was so angry, and he just couldn't believe it. And he went to his uncle and he said, I worked for you for 7 years, just as I promised I would do. Why did you trick me? Laban only said, it's not right for the younger daughter to marry before the older sister. Now here's where Laban really gets him. If you work for me for another 7 years, you can marry Rachel too. Now Jacob loved Rachel with all his heart, so he agreed to work for 7 more years. Now 7 plus 7 is, you got it, 14 years. Now, do you think that Laban's trickery reminded Jacob of the trickery that he used in getting the family blessing from Isaac? I bet it did. I bet he thought about that. Now, the Bible says that God uses things in our lives to help us grow. He wants us to be the kind of people he wants to have in his family. People who trust, who love, and obey him. And remember, we said that was something Jacob needed to learn how to do, how to be in the family of God. Now, Laban continued to cheat Jacob several other times after this, but God blessed Jacob anyway. And once he married Rachel, and he was already married to Leah, he blessed him with many children, and he made him a rich man with many flocks of sheep and herds and cattle. God gave him the faith that he needed to face all of his trials because he depended on God. 20 years after Jacob had left Canaan, so he worked for 7 years and got Leah, 7 years for Rachel, and then 6 more years. Then he left Canaan. God spoke to him and said, go back to the land of your fathers and your relatives, and I will be with you. This time, Jacob trusted God and obeyed him immediately. Now, he's also got to think about the fact is, wonder if my brother Esau is still angry with me. But we'll talk about that later, another time. Now, Leah and Jacob had 10 sons. Rachel, the mom we're talking about today, and Jacob had 2 sons, and one of the sons was named Joseph. Now, Joseph, do you remember about Joseph and his coat of many colors? Remember how his brothers sold him into slavery? Now, that's the story also for another time. But that tells you who this Rachel is and why she's so important, because Joseph was so important in the history of the Israelites. Now, Jesus was a descendant, means children, of Leah's son, Judah. But if it hadn't been for Joseph going into slavery and being taken to Egypt and saving the family from starvation, Judah would not have lived. So that's a very important thing for us to remember, that Joseph, Rachel and Jacob's son, played a very important part of our history. So, again, the moms. The very first mom was Eve. The next mom we talked about was Sarah. The next one was Rebecca. And today, Rachel. Now, I also want to tell you something about the season that's coming up. Advent's going to start soon. And we have these cute little cards that say, "What do I wonder about this Advent?" And they're little cards that once we open up our little package here, they're little tear-off cards. And they have, let's get to a page, they have questions. And on the back, they have the answers to the questions. So moms and dads can pick those up here at the church starting this Sunday and have them ready for you all as a family, 1 pack per family, to be able to talk about Advent and all the things that happen during the Advent season. I'm so glad I had a chance to talk with you about Rachel and Jacob today, and I look forward to seeing you all very soon. But until then, mwah!